All right, toe critters and wannabes. I guess you're probably thinking I'm a little arrogant calling anybody that's not a toe critter to be calling them a wannabe, but admit it. You know, if you were a ground pounder back in the early '80s and a bunch of tow jeeps went cruising by when you were standing alongside the road with your the 30 or 81 millimeter mortar tube across your shoulders or whatever, you'd be thinking, man, I wish I was one of those guys. Anyway, I'm going to try something different today. Last time I just kind of talked off the cuff. Well, now I'm going to do a script. Actually, I started writing a bunch of my stories down quite a while ago, and I've been sharing them like on Facebook and stuff, and with the hopes of someday maybe getting things together in a book. Well, then that was before I had my stroke, and writing became problematic to me. But I'd written down a few of the stories, and what I'm thinking I'm going to try. I'll just sit here and kind of read them as a script instead of trying to recall those instances again and retell them. I'm just going to go with the script that I wrote quite a while ago. Now this is I've read through a couple times just to kind of get familiarize myself, because this is something I wrote. This first one I'm going to do is something I wrote about 7 years ago. So about three years before my stroke. So I wrote this with a whole different part of my brain that no longer exists anymore. So when I was reading it through, it was kind of like almost like foreign thoughts to me. So it'll be a kind of a trip for me. But anyway, and I was very, very wordy back then. I noticed that it's like, yeah, this guy's got kind of runs on and stuff. But anyway, I'm gonna read it like basically verbatim, and that's we'll try it and see how that works. So here we go. It'll have its some fits and starts, I'm sure. This is a disclaimer here. This is a more somber, more somber story than I envision most of them are going to be. This is this will especially as I get to be 60 and looking back, a lot of people that aren't here anymore. Well, this is a story about three of my Marine Corps buddies that I lost when I was still in the Marine Corps. This will we can all think back about all the different people that we've lost over the years, and it's kind of this is kind of in memory for all of them. So anyway, this story is called Swoop. It says every weekend there was a ritual. Guys would gather Friday night at Swoop Circle. Marines with cars would pull in and yell out where they were headed. They would pack their cars full of guys going in the same direction. Each would toss in some gas money appropriate to the distance they were going. If a guy was going far enough and found enough passengers, he would end up with enough money to buy all his beer and food for the weekend. There were rules in place that governed how far from base you could venture, depending on how long your liberty was. The most restrictive, of course, was for daily liberty, and those that were on air alert. Air alert was meant basically that you were on call, subject to deployment anywhere in the world on a moment's notice. You were pretty much allowed to Jacksonville and its environs and the beach. In the case of air alerts, someone in your group called in every hour to make sure you hadn't been called out. Okay, technically we weren't supposed to leave base on air alert, but we figured that as long as we called in and didn't drink much, that we would be okay. On weekends, there was a concentric ring of distances around Lejeune that we were allowed to go, depending on whether we had a 48-hour pass of 72 or 96. I can't remember the exact distances. For the sake of argument, let's say it was 60, 120, and 180 miles. It's really immaterial, as the limits were mostly widely disregarded. On any given weekend, Marines would scatter the length of the East Coast from New York City to Miami. Some guys swooped every weekend. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina was hands down the most popular destination. About 130 miles down the coast from Lejeune, it was a seaside resort that draws millions of tourists from early spring through late fall. Guys would come back after a weekend down there with stories of thousands of bikini-clad young women just lining the beach waiting for Marines to make their weekend complete. I never did make it down there. The closest I came was the weekend before we left for my first med float. A tow squad was 5 men and 3 jeeps. The squad leader and his jeep, a standard issue with a canvas top, and 2 gun crews, a gun jeep with a gunner and a driver. As we prepared to go on float, my squad consisted of the squad leader, Sergeant Carroll Winston. He was a dark green Marine from Alabama, quiet and thoughtful. No one ever gave him a hard time about having a woman's first name, mostly because he was such a nice guy. But it probably didn't hurt that he had the best natural physique I'd ever seen. Michelangelo could not have sculpted anything more impressive. Massive shoulders and arms tapering down through a six-pack to what must have been a 25-inch waist. I was driver of one Jeep with Denny Phillips as my gunner. The other gun Jeep was driven by John Biaggi and Richard Lewis as his gunner. I had been hanging out with John off and on since tow school. A slight sort with mildly curly hair and a relaxed expression, he had a mischievous, I'll try anything attitude. He had come to tows after a stint on barracks duty in Rota, Spain. Barracks duty, for the uninformed, was duty on a naval base where Marines provide security, manning the main gate, guarding the armories, etc. John had a 6-inch scar on one side along his rib cage. It was crescent-shaped, square on one end, terminating in a point on the other. It looked remarkably like a bull's horn. Not surprising, because he picked it up when he participated in the running of the bulls in Pamplona. It turns out that he was just a wee bit slower than one of the bulls. I had gone out on the town with him a few times. It was always an adventure. He had a cocky attitude and was expert at baiting people. It was an amazing talent. He would rub people the wrong way until you felt like they were about to stomp the shit out of us. Then he would disarm them with a smile and a joke, and before you knew it, they would be buying us drinks. Lewis was built from practically the same mold as Biaggi. They could have been bookends. A bit darker complexioned and possessing a great Clark Gable stash, he and Biaggi made quite the pair as they fed each other straight lines and played off each other's replies. Sometimes it seemed as if they were unconsciously mirroring each other's movements. I was really looking forward to lighting up the streets of Europe with the two of them. Biaggi had been to Myrtle Beach a few weeks before and had spent the whole time with a local girl he met. He had been talking with her on the phone, and she had been trying to get him to come back down and bring some friends, as she had a bunch of girlfriends that would love to meet Marines. With a few weeks left before deployment, it was now or never. Lewis and I were quick to sign on to go. To drive us, we had Bob Parker and his pickup truck. Bob was one of the guys who had been at Toes pretty much since the beginning. A native of Boston, he fit all of the stereotypes. He was an intimidating person when you first met him, large with a gravelly voice and a gruff exterior. He had the thickest 5 o'clock shadow I've ever have seen. The shaving part of boot camp must have been hell for him. I'm sure that he never got his cheeks smooth enough to satisfy a DI. By the time he toweled off the shaving cream, it looked like he needed to start over. Once he got past his rough exterior, he was a sweetheart of a guy, a bemused sort with a standard issue sarcastic sense of humor. Seeing him on fire watch was a sight to behold. Decked out in boots, cami pants, and a white t-shirt, fairly standard, but the rest was all Bob. He had a beat-up old straw cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes, a military cartridge belt slung low on his hips, but instead of this standard issue 1945 cal pistol, he had a large pearl-handled chromed cap gun poking out of the holster. I have to admit, this is really hard trying to read and at the same time, you see these people slamming politicians for reading off a teleprompter. Well, people that are criticizing that have never tried it because it's very tough. And also, I can tell you right now why. I know why there are never any one-eyed newscasters. Anyway, to top off the ensemble, he had a 6-inch cardboard cutout of a sheriff's star with Dr. Death stenciled on it. He would stroll from one end of the barracks to the other, greeting everyone that came in with a booming, "Welcome to Pig Alley." The battalion officer of the day would come in and tell him to remove his get-up and get dressed to regulations. He would reply, "Yes, sir, right away, sir," and then saunter off as if he hadn't heard him, which was, I'm sure you've all have known that guy when you were in. We had the whole weekend planned. Biaggi had been in touch with his girl. She had several friends waiting to meet us. We had finished our duties early that Friday and were pretty much hanging around the barracks just waiting for liberty to be called. I was already dressed in civvies, just laying on my bunk relaxing. Lewis and Biaggi were over a couple bunks towards the end of the squad bay where their wall lockers were right next to each other. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught sight of them. They were perfectly backlit by the late afternoon sun, casting a halo of light. Both of them were wearing their dress blues. That was strange. I knew they both had dress blues. They had each come from barracks duty. But why would they both be wearing them now? As I swung around towards them and sat up, the sunlight faded, and as my eyesight adjusted, I saw that they were actually in their skivvies, pulling on jeans and t-shirts. That was odd. Usually I never hallucinate until I've at least had something to drink. About then, my friend Rob wandered by. "Hey, I just scored some green Hawaiian from a friend of mine. Care to partake?" Oh, hell yeah. This was the old days. Most bud was Mexican, brown and about 30% seeds. He had some of the fabled Maui Wowie. Let's go. Since liberty hadn't been called yet, we thought it best not to smoke in the barracks. So we headed to a clump of trees about a half a block away. The Hawaiian lived up to its publicity, green, fragrant, and packing a wonderful kick. We ended up smoking several bowls, immersed in a conversation about whether Plato or Socrates had their shit more together. Rob was an intellectual, and he and I had some great conversations over the next couple of years. He was on my second med float. At one point, we spent 60 days at sea without a glimpse of the land. Both of us read every single book in the ship's library during that stretch. Admittedly, it was contained in a room about 6 feet by 6 feet, actually smaller than a good-sized closet. It was its compact size that gave us the idea of reading every book. As we read them, we would discuss and dissect them to see if we had gotten the same thing out of them. Rob was a great guy, as mellow and even-tempered as they get. I have no idea how he ended up in the Marines. Later on, he actually turned down a promotion to corporal, said he just didn't want to be an NCO. This really confounded the higher-ups. I guess it wasn't something that people often did. Anyway, smoking the Hawaiian, we inexplicably lost track of time. When I returned to the barracks, I found that Parker, Lewis, and Biaggi had left without me. Oh well, maybe I'd go with them next time. But it still was Friday, so changing plans was no problem. I found a few guys heading out to town, and away we went. I had just returned home. I had just returned from a short leave home. While I was home, the failed attempt to rescue the hostages in Iran took place, which resulted in a helicopter hitting a transport aircraft after they aborted the mission, destroying both aircraft and killing 8 men. Since we were scheduled to board ships to head to the Mediterranean in about 2 weeks, we all immediately were called back early from our leave. Of course, we figured that finally our country had enough. We figured for sure we were going to be heading over there to kick some Iranian ass. It was why we had all joined. It was our destiny. We were all quite possibly as full of bravado and the invincibility of youth as a person could be. Also, while I was at home, I had not unexpectedly found out from my now ex-girlfriend Anne that she was seeing someone else, and it was over. So I headed out to town, the specter of war looming over my head, the weight of a broken relationship dragging my heart down, suffocating my soul. I went out intent on drowning my sorrows. I'm sorry. I was giggling the whole time I wrote that. Actually, I was 20 years old and not a care in the world. I was getting ready to embark on an adventure. I'd already spent a year in Asia, mainly Okinawa, also Japan, Korea, and the Philippines. Now we were heading to the Mediterranean area for 6 months. Southern Europe, Northern Africa, eventually through the Suez Canal, past the Horn of Africa, into the Gulf of Oman, the gateway to the Persian Gulf. Then down across the equator to Mombasa, Kenya. But all of this was in the future, though I was feeling the same anticipation of impending adventure that Bilbo Baggins felt as his home filled with dwarves. It was, as I said at the beginning, I was wordy back then before I had to relearn to speak. It was Friday night, and I was going out to get drunk, not for any other reason except that was what young Marines did on Friday nights, and I was good at it. The night of drinking had been fairly unremarkable for Marines. As I began to stir Saturday morning, my head told me that I had consumed more than our fair share of beer. As I searched my memory of the night before, I seemed to recall that we left each establishment voluntarily and more importantly on good terms with the bouncers. My pain-free hands and spinning rather than throbbing head told me that there probably hadn't been any fighting engaged in, and the fact that I was greeted by the sights and sounds of the barracks rather than a steel door with a food slot in it and 4 dingy cell walls meant that it had been a successful night all around. As I raised my head to peer around, it was a typical Saturday morning scene in the barracks. Foot lockers at the feet of the bunks were piled high with pizza boxes, snack bar wrappers, and soda cans. Half the bunks were filled with Marines displaying varying amounts of success at getting into them. Most had succumbed to unconsciousness while in the early stages of disrobing. Face down, one shoe hanging from their toes, the other stuffed under the pillow, seemed to be the preferred sleeping posture. I had chosen the flat on the back, feet on the pillow option. I still had a mild case of the spins, about 2 slow revolutions per minute. I was just laying there enjoying it, watching the dust mites dance in the shafts of early morning sunlight slicing through the gloom. It was peaceful, listening to the moans of dreams, the garbled sleep talk, most punctuated by shouted cadence or military jargon. And of course, the air was continually split by the booming peal of beer farts. I was enjoying the warm glow of that peaceful stage between shit-faced and sober. Thank God I'm Irish. This was what we experienced instead of hangovers. Suddenly, the peace was broken by the slam of the doors as the duty NCO burst into the squad bay. He was obviously distraught as he blurted out the news. Parker, Lewis, and Biaggi were killed in a car accident last night. As I typed this, the emotions flood back as if it was yesterday. Sobriety had never hit me so suddenly or as hard. I sat in shock on the side of my bunk. The warmth of alcohol flowing through my veins was replaced by the ice-cold stab of reality filling my bones, rooting me in place. To say that this has haunted me over the years would probably be an understatement. It may be the one incident from my past that as I have examined and re-examined it has shaped my whole personal philosophy and belief system. They had been riding in Bob's pickup truck. They had not gotten far from base. They were still well within the limits for how far you could go on a weekend liberty. Traveling on a rural 2-lane highway, they passed through an intersection controlled by a light. They had a green light. The tractor trailer coming the other way didn't see his red light. As they passed through the intersection, he hit them broadside at 60 miles per hour. All 3 of them died instantly. Of course, my first thought was, oh my God, I could have been with them. But my relief was short-lived, soon to be replaced by an abiding survivor's guilt. Cursed with a tendency to overanalyze everything, all lines of thought led me to the same conclusion. I was responsible for their deaths. Just consider the timing and you know that it is so. 2 vehicles traveling perpendicular to each other at 60 miles an hour. The instant when they both occupy the intersection at the same time is fleeting. If Parker's truck had passed through the intersection just a few seconds before or a few seconds after it did and no accident, the 3 of them would be alive today. If I had been in the barracks, even if we had left at the exact same time, just a couple of seconds spent waiting for a 4th person to get in the truck or go through the line at the first stop at the 7-Eleven on the way out of town, those couple seconds would have made all the difference in the world. But the blame could be seen to run even deeper. How long had they looked for me, waiting around to see if I would show? If they had not been looking for me, waiting for me, then they would not have left at the precise second that they had. Looked at that way, how could I not feel that I was responsible for their deaths? Though these questions still haunt me, but as my beliefs have evolved, I have made of my peace with them. I believe in the infinite universe theory postulated by quantum physics. For every possible outcome, for every possible result happens, and the universe spirals out an overlapping but separate infinite number of separate universes created every moment of every split second. We follow blindly along the path laid out in the universe that we perceive, while infinite other versions of ourselves follow all the other unlimited paths. Some other me experienced that oh shit moment as the semi impacted and sent us all on our journey into the unknown. Someone else, the four of us had a great time in Myrtle Beach. Two of us met our future wives. Two of us spent most of the weekend in jail. Biaggi and I still keep in touch. We were in each other's weddings. No one is ever dead that lives on in the memory of others. I think of them often, and they are still alive to me, though in the past. That is why, through all of my writings, theirs are the only real names that I've used. They deserve to be remembered. The epilogue here. A couple of days later, someone was talking about their funerals and the fact that they were being buried in dress blues. That sudden chill coursed through my bones again as I recalled my momentary glimpse of Biaggi and Lewis dressed in dress blues before they left on that last road trip. Hallucination or premonition, I don't know. But I do know that I still get goosebumps remembering it 30 years later, or 40 years later, I guess. That same day, I went to the PX to get back a roll of pictures that I had turned in. I leafed through the usual pics around the barracks and motor pool. As I turned to the last pic, I damn near pissed myself. It was a picture of Bob Parker, cowboy hat cocked low over his eyes, one thumb hooked in his cartridge belt, the other hand holding the chrome cap pistol as he blew across the barrel as if he had just fired a shot. He had his chest with the Dr. Death badge thrust out, and he was looking directly at the camera with a bemused but all-knowing smile. It was a great photo. The only problem was I hadn't taken it. I scanned the negatives. There was one for each of the 24 photos on the roll, none for the picture of Bob. I was completely freaked out. I ended up throwing the whole roll of photos away. They were haunted and I wanted no part of them. I have wished many times over the years that I had kept it. I still have no plausible idea how that photo got in there. The only possibility that makes any sense to me is that Bob was messing with me from beyond the grave. That would be so like him. In the military, often you have no time to mourn. We still were leaving for the Mediterranean. My squad had been halved. Lewis and Biaggi were replaced. We were heading across the Atlantic before we really had time to process. When we had been at sea for about 2 months, we were instructed to put on our dress uniforms and report to the ship's fantail. We were there for a service for Biaggi. His father or uncle was fairly high up in the Air Force, and they had the pull to get him a funeral at sea. It was a beautiful day, light robin's eggs blue sky with a smattering of cotton ball clouds, with the ship slowly pushing its way through the deep blue molten plastic Mediterranean. The fantail of the Guadalcanal was a deck area at the stern of the ship, on the same level as the hangar deck. It was completely enclosed except for the two openings through the flat vertical stern bulkhead of the ship. We were assembled in ranks parallel to the rail on our left. The chaplain and urn with John's remains were in front of us, with the honor guard, including riflemen behind them, facing us. It was a standard military service, the chaplain talking about being cut down in the prime of youth and living on in our memory. His eulogy underscored by the soundtrack of the sea, excitedly rushing to meet itself 40 feet below us, the occasional snap and crack of the flags as they danced in the wind. It was a standard military service, the chaplain talking about being cut down in the prime of youth and living on in our memory. his eulogy underscored by the sound of the sea excitedly rushing to meet itself 40 feet below us. The occasional snap and crack of flags as they danced in the wind. Then the damn bugler and taps. Anyone that doesn't get a bit misty when hearing taps played at a funeral has no soul. As the last notes were carried off on the wind, we did a left face toward the rail and saluted. The riflemen did a right face and raised their rifles. As the first volley rang out, even the most stoic among us were audibly sniffing, and shoulders were starting to quiver. The chaplain stepped to the rail, accompanied by 2 members of the honor guard. One held the urn, the other removed the lid. At the second volley, the chaplain began to intone, "Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." By the third and final volley, many of us were outright sobbing, although still at attention and saluting, as the echoes of the rifles drowned out the droning of the chaplain. The honor guard tilted the urn and tipped John's remains all over us. Simple physics. As a 20,000-ton ship moves, it displaces a lot of air. All this air rushes along the side, back in behind it, creating turbulence. The wind always blows in on the fantail. The somber mood was broken as we looked at each other. Red, tear-rimmed eyes had been replaced by Rocky Raccoon masks. I swear I could hear the sound of Biaggi's laughter carried on the wind. He would want his memory to bring a smile to our faces as it does to this day. One last note. About a year later, I was back at Lejeune. In between deployments, I was out with Mr. Nice Guy and a couple others. I'm not sure who we all had done a fair quantity of LSD, and so had our waitress. I think her name was Amber. I don't know. I know she did because that's who we got it from. At some point, we began to tell stories about Parker, Lewis, and Biaggi. Of course, we were talking about all the good times. There were no shortage of hilarious stories about all 3 of them. Soon we were all but rolling on the floor. Amber came up with our next round. Naturally, she said, "What's so funny?" At this, we all got quiet. I looked up at her and said, "We were just talking about our friends, Parker, Lewis, and Biaggi." Then Mr. Nice Guy leaned toward her and in a deep, flat, monotone, perfectly deadpan voice said, "They're dead." At this, the rest of us began to howl with laughter. Luckily, Amber did not hurt herself as she fell over several tables and chairs, scrambling to get away from us. It was weeks before she would wait on us again, and I don't think she ever turned her back on us. Anyways, that's the end. That's the story there. Like I said, I hope it brings up some good memories that for all you guys with people that have gone over the years, and I'm sure that this is not going to be the last story dedicated to somebody who's already gone. So anyway, that's about it, toe critters. So stay safe, and we'll talk to you later on, man. I'd say Addie's toad critters, but that's kind of probably redundant. Anyway, take it easy.